Hero Time, Chapter 31, Mutual. The next night, Jen insisted they go back to the warehouse. She wanted to have another look around. Kevin wasn't sure what she was looking for. When he asked Gwen, she just shrugged. A few hours later, Jen was standing in front of the teleporter, frowning. "You think you could get it working again?" she asked, never taking her eyes off the slightly glimmering quartz ring that made up the body of the machine. Kevin shrugged. "Maybe. Why?" Jen shrugged. "Well, we never know when we might need to teleport things." Kevin nodded. Gwen was a bit more suspicious. "And if we end up with some kind of mutant fly monster?" Jen snorted. "It's not that far-fetched considering the things we've dealt with. You remember that giant space tick and his cult, right?" Jen laughed long and loud. Kevin raised an eyebrow. "Giant space tick?" Jen gasped for breath as Gwen nodded. "It wasn't that funny at the time. Looking back, it's a bit funny. It was the first time she unlocked a cannon bolt. The cult switched to worshipping her for all of 5 seconds until they remembered she's human." Jen shook her head as she finally managed to catch her breath. "That whole summer. Sounds like it was a bad acid trip. Just without the drugs," Kevin said, shaking his head. Jen nodded. "Well, you're not wrong. But the teleporter?" Kevin nodded. "It shouldn't be too hard. We just need to find a second relay or have a repeat of what happened yesterday." "I vote we find the relay," Gwen said, side-eyeing her cousin. Jen nodded, though her eyes kept wandering back to the original teleporter. Unfortunately, it turned out that things weren't quite that simple. Kevin had no luck repairing the spare relay they found in the basement. The teleporter wouldn't function. After a few hours, he raised his hands in surrender. "Okay, I give up. I can't make it work." Gwen rolled her eyes from where she was sitting on the car, reading a book. Jen was still fiddling with the Omnitrix. Kevin noticed she did that a lot, when she was nervous or thinking too hard about something. He could only guess what she was thinking about, probably the Highbreed who had gone into the teleporter yesterday with her and hadn't come back out again. "Well, that was a waste of time." Gwen snapped her book shut and hopped off the car. "Maybe not. I know a guy who can fix it." Jen raised an eyebrow. "He lives on Earth and can fix alien tech?" "Cooper can fix anything. The guy's got away with machines, alien or human." "Wait." Jen frowned as Gwen froze mid-step. "Cooper. Not Cooper Daniels." "You know him?" Both girls nodded. "Yeah, short, blonde kid, blue eyes, gigantic crush on Gwen. We hung out when we were kids during that acid trip of a summer," Jen said, hiding her laughter badly. "Well, he's not short anymore, but yeah, that's Cooper. I've worked with him a few times. He owes me one. Should be able to convince him to help us out." It could never be that easy, though, could it? Cooper's mom was welcoming, offering them cookies and soda, but Cooper's room was empty. It wasn't really a room. It was a quite large shed filled to the brim with tech, alien and regular. It looked like someone had set off a trash bomb in here, old pizza boxes and soda cans strewn around alongside what looked like blueprints. Jen let out a disgusted groan as she scraped old pizza cheese off her shoe with a piece of cardboard. "This isn't right. Coop never leaves his warehouse. Look for signs of a struggle." Gwen poked at one of the more suspicious-looking machines and frowned. "Kevin, this whole place looks like a struggle." Jen nodded and frowned as she spotted something on the floor. It looked like a null-void projector, like the one Grandpa Max had been using. Her heart gave a twist as she picked it up, but the moment she touched it, something happened. Though she didn't even touch the trigger, the thing went off, a bright flash of light sailing out of the end of the gun. "Hit the deck!" Kevin and Gwen followed instructions beautifully, both diving to the trash-strewn floor as the light sailed over their heads and struck one of the monitors. The monitor flickered to life for a moment, then blazed to life, along with every other monitor in the room. Jen leapt back to her feet and found herself staring into the face of someone familiar, but also odd. Cooper? He was taller now, with far more muscle than Jen remembered him having. It had been 4 years since she'd seen him, though. He looked slightly frantic. "If anyone finds this recording..." He was cut off by a terrifyingly familiar screech. The screens played out his kidnapping as if they were viewing it in real time. It took 4 DNAliens to trap Cooper. Jen glared at the screen as it went dark. Smart kid. Left a message in a bottle for someone to find out what happened to him. Jen's frown grew deeper. Why was his mom so nice? Her son is missing. She turned on her heel. See if you can't find something to track him with, Gwen. Kevin, you stay with her. I'm having a thought. Kevin and Gwen glanced at each other, but nodded as Jen went back to the main house. As it turned out, she was just in time to stop the DNAlien posing as Cooper's mom from calling for reinforcements. Jen frowned at the unconscious being on the kitchen floor. She'd managed to take it by surprise, so she hadn't needed much force to take it out, just one whack with a pan from the stove. But this was an opportunity to test something she'd been wanting to try for a while. She'd broken the thing's ID mask, and peeling it off didn't take much. She tossed it to the side and looked down at her wrist. Okay, Omnitrix, don't fail me now. She whispered it, and reached out to touch the DNAlien again. At first, nothing happened. She growled in frustration. Come on, I want to fix her like we did Ken. Can you do it or not? A flash of green, and she was in the Omnitrix again. Tracking Cooper was easy. His energies were all over that room. Finding Jen in the kitchen of Cooper's house, kneeling over a DNAlien, her eyes flooded green, the lines of circuitry back on her skin, spreading to the DNAlien just like they had when Jen had cured Ken, was less easy. Neither of them dared touch her. Neither of them understood what was happening. Jen had tried to describe it after she'd rescued Ken, but she hadn't been able to find the words. It took them a few minutes, but eventually she breathed out, and the green retreated, a lifeless xenocyte in her hand, Cooper's mother stirring on the floor. The blonde woman groaned and sat up, clutching her head. Oh, what happened? Cooper! Jen caught her as she tried to get up too fast and slipped slightly on the remains of the DNAlien skin. It's okay, Mrs. Daniels. We're gonna find Cooper. Jen? I haven't seen you in years. I remember they came looking for my boy. They had these egg things with them. That's the last thing I remember. Jen nodded, shoving the lifeless xenocyte at Gwen and Kevin to get it away from the clearly upset woman. We know where he is. We're going to bring Cooper home, okay? Cooper's mom nodded as Jen helped her to her feet and into her living room. Is there someone you can call who you trust? Someone who knows about Cooper's powers and isn't weirded out by all this? I don't want to leave you alone, but we have to go. The woman turned blue eyes on Jen. I'll be fine, dear. You just bring my boy home safe. Jen nodded and glanced over at Gwen and Kevin. Let's go do just that. Nothing was ever easy. They had learned that lesson so many times over that being captured by DNAliens after getting Cooper really shouldn't have been a surprise. His cloaking device had been a genius idea, but the execution hadn't been all that great. Even with all four of them fighting, though, Cooper, while tall and well-built, wasn't that good at it. They still got captured. Cooper promised to cooperate if the others weren't harmed, and the three of them were marched into a storage room. Los Soledad didn't really have a jail, after all, but they made the mistake of not restraining them. Well, they cuffed Jen to a bookcase, but Gwen managed to break the cuffs easily by redirecting the energy outward. Jen frowned as she looked around, rubbing her wrist around the Omnitrix. Thanks. She stood and paused. She stepped over to a large gold metal structure. I don't remember what they called this stuff, but I have an idea. Kevin, absorb this. Can you get full coverage from just this much? Kevin looked the structure up and down and nodded. Yeah, easily. To prove his point, he touched the metal and in seconds was covered with it. Jen nodded. Gwen, can you block the light from that window for a second? The redhead nodded and did as she was asked. Jen flicked the dial on the Omnitrix and transformed into Echo Echo. She nodded and clambered up onto a shelf and hopped onto Kevin's shoulders. Okay, her voice echoed slightly. Kevin could feel the thrum through the metal covering him. I need you to get them to open that door, Gwen. Then get out of the way and hit Kevin with an energy blast. Kevin made a sound of protest, but Jen tapped him on the head. Trust me, this'll work. Once Jen and Kevin had joined forces into a makeshift sonic resonator, Jen using the reverberations through the metal covering Kevin's skin as a pitch guide when Gwen hit him, getting Cooper became a deadly game of tag. Getting to the half-built arch once they had Cooper was even more dangerous, but they had to take out the large cloaking device at least. Trashing it turned out to be easy after Cooper got over his vision. One more big blast of sound, and a mad dash for Kevin's car found them speeding along the road away from Los Soledad, breaking every speeding law on the way. Jen twisted around in her seat, eyes glued to the horizon. They aren't following us. Cooper sounded confused as he glanced back, too. Why would they? No one will believe us if we tell them what's really happening there, Kevin said, glancing in his rearview mirror. Anyone who went to check it out would just find what looks like regular humans anyway, Gwen added, running her hands through her hair. We don't even know what's happening at La Soledad, which means that soon we're gonna have to go back. She turned to Cooper. Can we count on you to be with us? Cooper looked at Gwen where she sat in the passenger seat. Anytime. Jen rolled her eyes, but nodded and held out her hand for Cooper to shake. He even did after a moment. Then he looked her over again. You cut your hair! Jen laughed. Yeah, about 4 years ago, Cooper. It's good to see you too, though. Cooper nodded, then went pale. Oh, God, they did something to my mom. She was... Jen held up her hands. How do you think we knew you got snatched? We went looking for some tech help and found your message. Your mom's fine. We cured her. All's well. Cooper stared at the three of them. How did you cure her? Don't look at us, Kevin said as he slowed the car to a much more legal speed. That one's on Jen. She does this thing with the Omnitrix and fixes them. Jen's face grew contemplative. Yeah, I had an idea about that, but I'll need your help. Cooper, and we'll need to catch a DNAlien or two. Cooper nodded as they pulled up to his house. The three of them had basically forgotten about the teleporter with everything that had happened, but Jen's brain was working overtime, and if she was right, then maybe they had a shot at beating the DNAliens after all. All she would have to worry about would be the Highbreed, who were formidable with or without an army. Chapter 32. Documented. Jen had been on edge for a while, ever since she spent what was nearly 2 days alone on an alien planet with a Highbreed, though it had only been a few hours on Earth, which still sort of confused her. But Kevin had explained that it had something to do with the axis of the planet she'd been on and the rate it had spun around its suns. But the experience as a whole had her questioning things. It had shown her that the Highbreed weren't completely irredeemable. Maybe. It was making her truly question what was happening and why. It was clear that the Highbreed were in charge. The DNAliens were a workforce built on the planet to carry out their plans. What exactly that plan was still wasn't exactly clear, though. Jen had a horrible feeling that Ranny had been serious when he'd said every species other than pureblood Highbreeds should be wiped off the face of the universe. She shook her head as she pulled another box out of her closet and tossed it aside. After a few more minutes of rummaging, she found what she'd been looking for. It was an old shoebox she'd kept since she was 10 years old, filled with souvenirs from the summer when she'd found the Omnitrix. She grinned at the gold Sumo Slammers card that sat proudly atop the mishmash and pulled it aside. After a minute of digging, she found what she was looking for. Pulling out a small silver device, she grinned slightly as nostalgia washed over her. It was a little bigger than a regular holo recorder and rectangular instead of circular. It was a device Azimuth had given her on Xenon, the planet he'd been spending his self-imposed exile on after he'd decided to stop the self-destruct of the Omnitrix. She'd been about to leave with Grandpa Max, Gwen, and Tetrax when the inventor had pulled her aside and pressed it into her hands. The Omnitrix was always meant as a tool for learning and teaching. You have found a new use for it, and a noble one at that. But I would see it still teach something. What exactly that meant, Azimuth had told her to figure out on her own. So she started making video logs about all of her aliens. There were 20 in here so far. Jen set the souvenir box in her closet as she cringed slightly at the thought of her 10 and 11-year-old self geeking out about her aliens. She shook her head. It was unlikely that Azimuth had even watched these. He was a very busy Galvin, after all. But it had helped her work through her thoughts before. Maybe it would be helpful now to just get it all out in the open. She set the recorder down on her desk and checked the time on her alarm clock and nodded. Her parents would be out at dinner and their movie for another few hours. She sat down at the desk chair and tapped the recorder. Blue lights flashed over her, and she smiled slightly. Entry 21. Swamp Fire. She went through each of her aliens in turn. Some got more detailed entries than others. The incident with Big Chill's unexpected pregnancy and the problems and symptoms it had caused got a full 20 minutes to itself. After making the newest 10 entries and ranting about Serena and Bellicus for a good 10 minutes straight, she paused, then nodded and turned the recorder back on. Entry 31. Newly acquired alien. Okay, so I haven't tried this one yet, but I think I know for sure what it is. I think it's an Apollinite. She spun the dial on the Omnitrix to the newest alien and held it up for the recorder to see. Its silhouette stood with feet slightly apart, arms up as though drawing a bow, but only the arrow was present. I haven't been around that many aliens recently, except the Hybrid and the DNAliens, but I'll get to that in a minute. But this new alien being an Apollinite is the only thing that makes sense. Last time I got a new alien without it being unlocked, like way big, was because I got bit by what we thought was a werewolf. I ended up with Gen Wolf after that. Also thinking about changing that name if I ever get that transformation back, but she paused, going red and hoping that Azimuth wouldn't notice if he ended up watching these. Albraxix kissed me. That could be considered a DNA transfer, right? She sighed and smacked her head into the desk, trying to clear her mind. Rubbing away the redness on her forehead, she sat back up. I haven't tried this one yet because I'm kind of scared. What if it's not what I think it is? What if it's some kind of after effect of Alien X? What if I get stuck again? What if this time I can't get back out? She shook her head again. I'll add an addendum to this entry once I try it. She flicked off the recorder and shook her head again, running her fingers through her hair until it was sticking up straight. She shook her head again and spun her chair, thinking. Azimuth had said he wanted this to be a learning tool. Maybe she should share what she had learned. She spun her chair back to the desk and flicked the recorder back on. Entry number 32. Hybrid and DNAlien. If you're watching this, Azimuth... She trailed off and shook her head. You're probably not watching this. Okay. So, I've cured 2 DNAliens. My cousin, Ken Tennyson, and the mother of a friend of mine, Sarah Daniels. It's been an experience both times. It was like I went into the Omnitrix and separated the DNA manually. I think I could do it again if I tried. It seemed almost easier the second time. She fiddled with the dial on the Omnitrix as she spoke. At first, I wondered why the Omnitrix didn't pop up a DNAlien transformation after I literally held their genetic code in my hands, but I think I figured it out. She looked back up at the recorder. None of the species in the Omnitrix are parasitic. They can all live and survive on their own. DNAliens can't. They need a host. The xenocyte attaches to a host's DNA and breaks it down until there's only enough left to hold it together. The Omnitrix can't copy it because it's not a complete DNA sequence on its own. But what I don't understand is why it hasn't copied the Hybrid. She explained the incident with Riney on the desert planet up until his arm was sliced off by the bug that had been attempting to kill her. If my theory is right, and the Omnitrix uses me as kind of a receiver for new DNA like it did with Gen Wolf, then why don't I have a Hybrid transformation? His blood was all over my arm when I fixed him. Albraxix first kissed me when I was Alien X. It shouldn't matter that I was Swampfire at the time. If that's how it works, then the transformation should be there, but it's not. She shook her head. Maybe that's not how it works. I don't know. I just had to get all these ideas out of my head. There was a knock at her door, and she shut off the recorder, quickly stashing it in her desk drawer. Come in! A head of red hair peeked around the door. Hey, Jen, I need a sparring partner. My usual one's out of town, and I can't use my powers on him anyway. But the coach gave me free reign of the gym for the next few hours. Feel like a workout? Jen grinned and nodded, grabbing her coat.